All right. We Today is the 9th of January 2026. Um, the time is exactly 18:22 in the afternoon. We're doing learning unit 2 of victimology CMY 3705. Let's dig in. Victim support and empowerment. Overview: secondary victimization in the criminal justice system, CJC. Okay, and then traditionally, courts ignored witnesses' needs. This, of course, led to the secondary victimization, where many victims of crime were treated with disrespect and had their basic human rights ignored. This secondary victimization may even be experienced more negatively by the victim than the initial trauma related to the crime. Definition of concepts. According to Fenton 2001, secondary victimization can usually be described as the ill-informed, insensitive, blaming treatment of victims by officials who work for the criminal justice system. The definition can be further extended to include victimization by the victim's family, friends, or community. Please visit the following link for further reading. Often, this takes the form of blaming, where the victim is blamed for the crime or for somehow contributing to the crime. Now that we understand what is meant by secondary victimization, we can examine the process involved in the secondary victimization of individual from the start of their contact with the criminal justice system, in other words, during the court process itself. How does secondary victimization occur? Secondary victimization often starts when the victim first reports the crime to the police. Victims, and especially women and children who are victims of crime, and especially in the event of sexual assault or rape, have to face the police disbelief that the crime occurred. The insensitive manner in which they are treated begins the process of secondary victimization. Discouraging or preventing the woman from laying charges further perpetuates the victim's negativity and increases her sense of vulnerability. Furthermore, both family and friends may discourage the victim from reporting the crime. All of this resistance from both family and the community or criminal justice officials may exacerbate the trauma the victim is experiencing, leaving this individual feeling alone and isolated. Often, negativity follows the victim into the court process. Few victims understand the dynamics of the court process, criminal procedures followed, and evidentiary law. According to Fenton 2000, victimization takes place at various levels during the court process. She mentions the following: a failure to provide private waiting or report taking facilities, not informing victims of court procedures and evidence. Most victims have no idea how a criminal case is tried. Failing to explain why certain questions are being asked or procedures followed, and not updating victim on the progress of the investigation or trial. All of this adds to the victim distress and uncertainty and helps to perpetuate the trauma experienced. Long awaiting periods for victims before they are examined and treated, as well as the time which often lapses between reporting an incident and appearing in court, may all contribute to and further exacerbate the victim's stress. To make matters worse, during the hearing itself, the victim's right may be infringed upon by the defense. For example, a failure on the part of the prosecutor to object to inappropriate cross questioning in court of the victim by the defense attorney may be extremely traumatic to the victim and may even put the victim in the position that she or he looks guilty. At this point, we will stop to examine. At this point, we will stop to examine a case study. Okay, there is a case study, Lindy instructions, as per indicated here. But what I will do is I will move straight to what is victim empowerment and support. Victim empowerment refers to the process through which individuals who have suffered conflict or violence are helped to overcome their grief and resentment, thus enabling them to become more positive, proactive, and self motivated members of society. It can be defined as those strategies and public policies which provide communities with the skills and self confidence, support, and tools necessary to become more effective advocates of the rights and the needs of victims in the light of institutionalized and historic discrimination, both in the government and private sector. Victim support models. There are two basic models, and a third which is a blend of the previous two. The first model suggests that service can be delivered in a specific form of welfare or charity. This model is governed by the ideology of care. The second states that the victim service can be part of the administration of criminal justice, in which case the model of governed by the ideology of human rights or just society. Internationally, several practical examples of both models are available and will shortly be discussed to argue for the importance of the third model or point of view, namely the model which sees victims' policies as an integral part of the crime prevention. The care model. Prime examples of the care model are those which involve or include state compensation schemes, especially those which apply general standards to determine awards for victims of crime. Historically, state compensation schemes belong to the oldest provisions of crime victims. In many Western countries, such schemes were introduced between 1965 and 1980. In most cases, existing schemes fall short of being fully satisfactory welfare provisions for crime victims. Only some victims are eligible, and the actual delivery tends to be time consuming and burdensome for the claimants. Victims who are poor will, of course, welcome any money received. In developing nations where a few people are fully covered by insurance or for medical bills, state compensation is an important provision. An important second category of the care-oriented service are rape crisis centers, shelter homes for victims of spouse abuse, and finally, general victim support schemes. In most Western countries, these kinds of services were originally exclusively offered to female victims. In the 1980s, similar services started to become available for all victims of all types of crime, including victims of burglaries, assault, robberies. In the United Kingdom and Netherlands, all victims of either serious or less serious crimes are now routinely contacted by trained volunteers and offered immediate practical moral support. The police are instructed to ask all relevant victims permission to give their names, address to local support schemes. This approach seems to work well. The criminal justice model. The criminal justice model incorporates victims of crime and they are provided for and included within the criminal justice process. They are taken into consideration by police, are referred to support agencies, are given advice on prevention measures, and have the right to be notified of the outcome of the investigation or of the ensuing criminal proceedings. They have the right to inform the court of the impact of the victimization in the form of victim impact statement and are afforded the right to receive restitution from the offender. In many parts of the United States, victims also have a right to express an opinion on the most appropriate punishment for the offender. The prevention model. The implementation of justice-oriented provision for the crime victims is sometimes hampered by lack of motivation on the part of the relevant professions. Helping victims is often not seen as part of the core business of the police or the prosecutor, although the provision of these services is highly desirable as an end in itself. It is important to emphasize their importance in the prevention and control of crime. Given this, we therefore want to propose a third model of victim services, namely victim services as part of crime prevention. There are at least four reasons why a better deal for crime victims is important in the fight against crime. The first is that most crimes are brought to the attention of the police by victims or their relatives. Also, the chance to arrest the offender and obtain a conviction largely depends on the information supplied by the victim. If many victims are doubtful whether reporting the case to the police will do them any good, as in clearly true in South Africa, this obviously seriously undermines police effectiveness. For criminal investigation to be at all functions, the victim's cooperation is obviously essential. This is why the number of satisfied victims ought to be used as a performance measure of criminal investigation departments. Even more important for the reduction of crime is the role of potential and actual victims in crime prevention. Criminality can be prevented by doing something about the economic hardship of groups at the risk and limiting their chances of becoming offenders. Actual offenders should also be empowered to stay crime free after their release from prison. Offender oriented prevention, although fraught with difficulties, remains a must. Since the level of crime is, as discussed above, partially determined by the availability of suitable targets, potential and actual victims can also make an important contribution to the prevention of crime by improving their own self-protection measures. Simply because if potential victims offer fewer opportunities for crime, fewer opportunistic crimes will be committed. There is growing evidence that only some of the crimes prevented by better protection are displaced to other targets. In short, victims-oriented prevention works. Refer to Van Dyke, Victim Empowerment and Support in an International Perspective, ISS Monograph 7, Putting Victims on the Agenda, if you want to read up further on these issues. 2.5, South African Perspective on Victim Empowerment and Support. South African scenario regarding models of care From an international perspective, the rate of criminal victimization in South Africa is fairly high owing to a combination of various risk factors. Firstly, the level of crime is driven up by the presence of economically deprived youngsters, as in many other developing nations, and at the same time by the availability of suitable targets, as in affluent nations. The high level of crime seems to have structural causes that needs to be addressed by a comprehensive crime policy. In South Africa, many crime victims who report their victimization to the police are dissatisfied with their treatment. Many would like to receive some sort of specialized help, but this help is simply not forthcoming. The problems of crime victims are similar to those experienced elsewhere in Africa. The victim policies that are needed to remedy this situation can be guided by either or both of the two prevailing victim support ideologies, the care ideology and the criminal justice ideology. Many of the poorer victims of violence will greatly benefit from a state compensation scheme. It is also essential to develop the national wide network of support agencies for all victims possible with the involvement of volunteers. Experience in the United States and Europe suggests that a purely care-oriented approach will not suffice. The victims demand that justice be done needs to be met, and this can only be achieved by the criminal justice system itself. It seems advisable to draft a comprehensive Bill of Rights for crime victims in South Africa, one that includes process changes in the law, changes in the procedures, and new codes of conduct for the professions involved. As we have said repeatedly, victim policies not only contribute to the making of more caring and just society, such policies can also help to prevent and control crime. Potential and actual crime victims can support the police by placing the responsibility on the community members to improve their own self-protection measures. Repeat victims can also help the police by installing burglar alarms, which may make it easier for the police to arrest perpetrators. By treating victims more fairly, the criminal justice system can maintain and restore the victim's respect for the law and thus prevent a downward spiral of violence and resentment. In this perspective, helping crime victims is a task for welfare agencies and volunteers in close cooperation with the police, the prosecutors, and the courts. A victim policy clearly calls for multi-agency approach. Development of the Victim Empowerment Program from the National Crime Prevention Strategy. In South Africa, unacceptable high levels of crime and violence continue to be threatening the significant gains of transformation. The government response includes a range of policy initiatives which with the National Crime Prevention Strategy providing an overall framework for criminal justice policy and crime prevention. The NCPS is one of the 6 pillars of the National Growth Development Strategy of the Reconstruction and Development Program. Cabinet approved the NCP in 1996. The objectives of the NCPS was to continue to work at reducing crime levels in South African society and recognizing the inadequate support historically given to the crime victims. The NCPS acknowledged the need to promote and implement a victim centered approach to crime prevention. This was done through the introduction of Victim Empowerment Program as an integral part of the NCPS. Broadly speaking, this program aimed to make integral criminal justice victim friendly and to minimize the negative effects of crime and violence on crime victims. The failure of effective victim empowerment in the criminal justice system may encourage private justice, e.g., vigilantism, and lead to a lack of public confidence in the system. Internationally, experience has shown that good management of direct and or indirect victims and or witnesses is essential in assisting routine police investigation. Feedback to the victims regarding the process of investigation and prosecutions must become part of case management and needs to be regarded as a key performance indicator for effective police investigation. One of the key outputs of the Victim Empowerment Program within the NCPS was to develop a comprehensive model that incorporates integrated service delivery to victims of crime and violence that is in line with the national standards. This approach was based on the premise that crime is a social issue and requires multi-agency intervention. The service delivery model was to be based on the interdepartmental and intersectoral collaboration. The main role players, as described in the NCPS VEP documents, and welfare social development as the lead agency, SAPS, the courts, and the prosecutors of the Justice Department, Correctional Services, and Health and Education Department, NGO, non-governmental organization, community-based organizations, CBOs, and other structures of local government level provide support to the sectors in their endeavors to prevent and reduce crime and violence. This model aims to move towards maximizing available resources while minimizing the duplication of efforts. It sustains state-managed delivery of caring, supportive, and accessible services. A restorative justice system seeks to encourage full participation particularly of young offenders, where treatment is aimed at enabling minor offenders to avoid a life of crime. Crime victimization may breed popular contempt of human rights, and the negative impact of this leads to widespread insecurity. Many South Africans observe the Bill of Rights as providing greater protection to criminals. It was thus recommended that the government adopt a crime prevention approach that places the rights and needs of victims at the center of the strategy. We are done for today.